All right, let's do this. Peanut, if you're staying in the room, no talking. Hello, and welcome to the PhotoWork podcast, the talky and touchy-feely version of my book, PhotoWork, 40 Photographers on Process and Practice. Hello, everyone. I'm Sasha Wolf. And sadly, I'm solo today. So this intro will be shorter and not that interesting. It's certainly not fun because without you-know-who, I'm really just not that fun. And you-know-who is Michael Chovan-Dalton. Michael Chovan-Dalton. Where are you, Michael? I know where you are. You're in New Jersey working away. So my schedule is nuts, has been nuts lately. Michael's schedule is pretty intense. We just could not get it together to find a time when we could both record. So, stuck with me. Very sorry. I owe everyone an apology. But there it is. Peanut is in the room with me as usual, so I guess I'm not totally alone, but she's decided not to say anything. So today's episode is a conversation with a longtime senior critic and right now acting director of graduate studies in photography at Yale MFA, John Pilson. And I think it's a really interesting episode. The episode focuses on sort of I was going to say the pros and cons of getting an MFA, but it's really not positioned that way. We're just talking through what an MFA at Yale looks like, what it's comprised of, and sort of John's thoughts about the experience that the students are likely to have, often have. He himself graduated from Yale MFA in photography, so not only has he been teaching there for a long time, but he went there. And I think it's really, really interesting. I'm often asked by artists who have not gotten MFA if I think they should. Of course, I don't know whether they should. There are pros and cons, just like with anything. But I really am sympathetic to, just that question and, not knowing whether that's the road for someone. I went through that myself, so I'm super sympathetic. Anyway, so I thought that this would be really interesting and useful. I wanted to talk to John about his own practice as an artist as well, and we talk a little bit about that, but once we really start talking about Yale, we get stuck there, hopefully in a good way. So maybe John and I will talk another time, and I'll have more time to ask him about all the really interesting and great creative work he's doing. Quick shout out to a book he just edited for Sleeper Studio and A New Nothing. It's a wonderful sort of John Sarkowski-esque book of writing on disparate images. In this case, it's portraiture. But if you're interested in that, and I recommend it, go to Sleeper Studio's website and check that out. Anyway, okay, I'm fading because I need this shot in the arm of Michael Chovan-Dalton, and I'm not getting it. Sorry, Peanut, but you're doing nothing for me here in the energy department. Anyway, okay, without further ado, my conversation with John Pilson. Thanks, everyone. John Pilson, welcome to the PhotoWork podcast. It's great to have you on.
Thank you, Sasha. It's great to be here.
So, John, we'll do the little rundown that we do at the top of every show where, because I just refuse to read anyone's biography, I make them do it themselves. So can you just tell us about your journey to where you are today?
Sure. I'm happy to do that. Born in Manhattan, pretty decent childhood until I was ripped from the Upper East Side and plunked down in Lower Westchester County. If you've ever seen The Ice Storm, that was filmed about 5 miles from where I grew up, and I'm grateful for the book and the film because that's it. Anybody ask me about my childhood, it's just pretty much it, except my family was Jewish and kind of not as, no key parties or anything like that, but kind of like, existential cul-de-sac, second growth forests and modernist architecture in the middle of the woods. That was where I was at. And then from there, I started at one college called Hobart William Smith, which was way up beyond Ithaca, upstate New York, cold, but great.
Yeah, I got into Hobart. It was one of the few schools.
Yeah, Hobart William Smith, if you remember. I think it's still like an all men's school and all women's school kind of coexisting. Yeah. But anyway, that lasted about a year and a quarter, and it was great. It was kind of like going to college in the 50s. I was a real outcast for not pledging a frat or playing lacrosse, but I did meet some great folks there, and I began to study art history, and I got a lot more interested in studio art. They didn't have much of a studio art program. It dropped out. Moved to Painter's Loft on the Bowery. She was a woman who was renting out a couple cubby holes in her Bowery loft. Also turned out to be the same building that Jim Jarmusch lived in, which was nice to see him kind of trailing clouds of smoke. Yeah. And this was also at the tail end of what I think most people talk about when they talk about downtown. 1988, and I spent most of 88 working at the Limelight. As a bus,
I probably saw you there.
It was an education. That was a real education. Semester abroad, semester below. It was that summer was the Tompkins Square riots, which I always thought I think a lot of people think is significant in terms of how downtown is characterized as kind of slowly disappearing. Then applied to Sarah Lawrence, got in, thought I was going to be studying film. I was interested in studying film, and got there, and on the first day of classes, when you run around and shop things, the film department was looking a little shabby. I think they had just let somebody go, and I just remember a really well-meaning person sitting amidst a pile of equipment and just looking unhappy, and kind of just something about the vibe didn't seem quite right. So I ran across campus to the photography department, where there was a line just around the block to study with Joel Sternfeld, who was the only person teaching photography at Sarah Lawrence at that moment. And I had a portfolio of photographs that I had made in a workshop, mostly of my girlfriend. And when I finally got my chance to sit down in his office, I showed it to him and I said, "Now this is not good, okay?" And he immediately stopped me and said, "You're in. Everybody else thinks they're a genius."
That's great.
And so that's how photography started in earnest. And that was 3 great years at Sarah Lawrence. And then I was encouraged. I was encouraged to apply to grad school, and I did that, and was waitlisted and got in by the seat of my pants, because Fazil Sheikh got a Guggenheim and decided he didn't need to go to grad school. And if I ever meet Fazil Sheikh, I'm going to have to thank him, because he paved the way.
And where did you wind up going?
That was Yale School, the photo program at Yale. That was 91 I started, graduated in 93. But, I should say that, that experience of going straight to grad school and that kind of forked trajectory between the people that I was the closest to, going straight out of undergrad is still an unusual thing. It doesn't happen that often. It's usually frowned upon, discouraged. And when I look back, I know that there are things that I might have been able to really address and be more self-directed with if I had waited a little bit, but I didn't. And so when I got done with all that schooling, back to the city, and a series of jobs, just trying to keep it together. There were not a lot of, not a lot of role models, not a lot of paths, not a lot of beaten paths to say well, maybe I'll go that way or go that. I mean, nobody I studied with, almost nobody had gallery representation. There was just nothing going on. Andrea Modica was the most discussed Yale grad, at least back then. She had a show at Edwin Houck, and that was a big deal. And Philip Lorca de Corsia, who taught at Yale, and I had actually met him briefly before that. He's someone that was really important to me, and it was significant. It felt significant when he came in and said, I just talked to Peter McGill, and he says he's already carrying Nan, and he can't take on another color photographer. So, back to the salt mines.
Right. Wow.
I worked for Annie Leibovitz after Yale. for a bit in her archives, and then
Oh my.
and then I did some catering, and I definitely explored that idea that like, well, if it had something to do with photography, then that's the job for me. Then a slightly older friend of mine, a sculptor, said, you're killing yourself with freelance and working for other artists. You come work at my job. It's great for artists. It's just data entry, presentation graphics at this big investment bank, which sounded insane. And I spent the whole first year thinking I was going to be fired. But it was boom years, dot-com economy. The money was just everywhere. And they paid us to be there in case they needed us. And so I did also I got like a 360 on my SAT math scores, like I can't do simple. I still do the Sesame Street. I do the Sesame Street style of like 4 apple pies. I have to see the apple pies when I add up the check and stuff like that. But there I was like pouring, Excel spreadsheets filled with data into pie charts and scattergrams. And the great thing about that job was that, the two great things about that job was that it allowed me to only have to work 3 days a week, so 2 12-hour shifts and an 8 on Fridays. And the other great thing that happened was that I slowly but surely started to make work there at that job. And that was a kind of revelation. And, Sternfeld told me exactly what was going to happen when I was trying to understand what going to grad school was going to mean. And he said, look, you're going to go for 2 years, you're going to get shaken up. It's going to take you exactly 2 years to get over it. And then you'll start to make the work you were meant to make. And he was right.
You feel like that happened?
Yeah. The work I did in grad school was very much kind of caught up with influences and desires that were a combination of wanting to kind of idealize friends, family, and lovers, and also document them somewhere in between. Every kind of few years, I feel like there is a hot topic, whether you're in school circles or not. But believe it or not, they were still getting over color. And setting up photographs was still kind of a scandal. But that's where I ended up. And also there was just this idea that like things you did in grad school were done in real high pressure and kind of unusual circumstances. And the idea was you put it all in a box, put it under your bed, and then got back to work because it really mattered. That I felt that was a shared value. Like now we're going to start. And checking in with your friends and peers, seeing what they were doing after the smoke cleared was everybody considered it really important. That first body of work after school. And my first was I got an 8x10 camera and I just kind of in a self-flagellating kind of like pilgrimage type thing where I didn't really make many pictures, but I strapped the 8x10 to my back and walked the length of Manhattan up and down with barely ever taking the camera out, just kind of penitent, sweating and looking. And in the course of that summer, I was in Lower Manhattan and I saw out of the crowd, all of a sudden there was a still point of this man and woman dressed in full wedding attire and without any photographers or any friends or family, just kind of standing there like they were waiting for a bus. And it turned out that this was City Hall, this was Borough Hall, where folks go to get their marriage licenses and where they go to get civil ceremonies. And somewhere in the back of my head, I heard my mother, her usual refrain, like, well, you could do bar mitzvahs, you could do weddings. And the idea of kind of being an unpaid wedding photographer or being able to say, like, I'm doing weddings for about 4 years. So that was an important project for me. And then I had an epiphany on that when I was making those photographs. There was a moment where, there was a man and a woman, they had just gotten married. They were Muslim, and I was fiddling with my, just trying to get it together, the film holders, and it takes time, and people get bored, but bored can be your friend. But this guy decided to entertain his bride by singing this jazz standard, which just happened to be my favorite song ever. And after it was over, I thought, that is just not going to be part of the thing I made. And that got me interested in kind of video as an extension of portraiture. So I started making video kind of portraits of people at work and then started photographing at work.
So somehow you wind up where you are now, which is you're a senior critic in the MFA photography program at Yale, and right now you're the acting director of graduate studies in photography because Gregory Crutzen is on sabbatical.
Gregory Crutzen's on sabbatical, yes.
So it's the name of a novel.
That's right.
Let's talk about what it is you do at Yale in the MFA program and what the MFA program at Yale is all about, because obviously this question of whether or not one should go to graduate school is a huge, huge thing that hangs over a lot of young artists' heads if they haven't done that, and
Right.
this sort of feeling tortured by it. So maybe we can get into some of the pros and cons.
Yeah. I mean, this is my 20th year.
Really? Oh
Yeah.
my gosh.
My
Wow.
the first class I was asked to teach was a video class. So I went to sleep really nervous about facing a classroom of grad students. I really hadn't taught. Maybe I'd taught a class at Bard undergrad at that point.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, I have a lot to say about it. I've experienced a lot. I've seen a lot of things. I think you're right. I have a lot of reverence for the significance of that commitment, that investment. I learn each year something about where the program might sit in people's imaginations, at least from the applications. You learn a lot about what that context may or may not mean at any given time from the pool of applicants. Right. I mean, what they say.
That's interesting. I've never thought of that. Yeah.
It's an incredible snapshot of what's going on too in the world. I mean, beyond, having to being involved in making the choices. You get this incredible snapshot of affinities and difference, and there's currents that kind of run through a certain year's applicants. You can see what they're looking at and what they care about. And at the interviews, I always ask students, applicants, why a photo program? I mean, when it comes to grad school, I think that is a critical issue in making your decision. Most grad programs, or a lot of them, are studio schools, studio programs where there's no name above the door, right? Photography, graphic design, painting, sculpture. And I get different answers when I ask that question. Mm-hmm. But most of them have to do with something very personal to that person. And on my own end, I do find that people a lot of origin stories have to do with falling in love with one medium, and things spiral out from there. I think the sandbox is great for a certain period of time, but then infinite possibility is not really. I don't really hear a lot of people talking about wanting to do everything. Mm-hmm. They usually describe their commitment to a medium about being a kind of problem, a compelling set of limitations that it's like a straitjacket. Like mm-hmm. It's frustrating, sure, but man, when you get out of it, it's really an achievement.
When you say that you can tell a lot about where sort of the zeitgeist of photography is based on applications, is Yale, I don't want to use the word receptive, but does the program move along with that, or is the program the program?
Sure. No, I mean, I think everyone's mindful of how I guess there's some like cliches out there about bubbles and ivory towers, but I don't really know what those things refer to, because the world is present, right? I mean, mm-hmm. people bring their lives and their biographies, their concerns. The headlines are in there, and when you're talking about Yale, often the headlines involve Yale. Mm-hmm. Whether it's Kavanaugh or whatever. I'm just saying that I find that there's an agility, I think, and an openness to stakes and whatever anybody's stated ambition is.
So how is the Yale of today, and what is the Yale graduate studies program in photography today, and how is that different than when you were there? Describe it to people.
Yeah, I mean, I've been other places, right? So I do mm-hmm. have some perspective, but the thing I'm always up against when it comes to describing the place is that from my vantage point, it's just so entirely bound up with infinitely specific experiences,
right,
individuals.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Every year when an incoming class comes, and when I'm in a position to welcome them, like I was this semester, I always tell them, like, look, you're in an entirely new place. It's not what it was last year. It's not what it was 5 years ago. The entire character of engagement and what I encounter in those critiques any given year is entirely dependent on who's there and what they bring. And that goes for the critics too. So I don't know. I mean, I just feel that it takes the artist seriously. It works with ambitions. One word that I think is useful is I think there's a lot of confiding. Mm-hmm. Like I always try to look at T.S. Eliot when the fall semester hits, because his essays on he took being a critic really seriously, and he really tried to find the most productive Venn between poet and critic of poetry. And sometimes he would go so far as to say, like, well, yeah, like criticism is poetry by other means. I won't go that far, but he does talk about reaching for language, really, as opposed to just applying standards or bromides, or, I just feel like our job is just to do our best to reach for original language and original thought to address what somebody's done. I mean, some of the broad stroke descriptions of the place, official or unofficial, has always been that the goal is to talk to the work, to be able to kind of pop the hood like a mechanic and say, like, how does a photograph generate meaning? How does it work? How does it fail? How does the thing you make jibe with your stated ambition? What's been left out? What's being hinted at? But when it comes to some of the most valuable criticism, I always find that it's almost like, and the reason that I almost want to say that it's not that it's a privileged conversation, but if you like recorded crits, I don't think that half of the significance would come across to an outside observer, because what's impossible to understand is the investments all the way around, and the difference between somebody's response on seeing their work, somebody's work at the first crit versus the second crit, or the critic that's been at this person's interview, and it's year 2, and we have history. And, mm-hmm. We've all kind of shot for the moon and stumbled, and we've been through a lot, and we're getting to know each other really well.
You're in a relationship.
Yeah. And so that brings me back to the word confide, because I think when we're at our best, to confide in someone is to literally to say, like, all right, this is not a review. It's not a PhD thesis. I'm not a curator. There's a whole lot of things that we're not, but we have experience, and we reach for language that we wouldn't just go around and do for fun. Like, I just think how strange it is, because the language you reach for is not something you would, you just go around doing casually, like really attempting to tell somebody what you see and what you think, or to question a weakness. I mean, that's not something we do even with our close friends. So it feels like confiding, saying, I wouldn't say this to just anybody, but I'm going to say it to you. I'm going to entrust you with something speculative about what I see going on. Now, do with it what you will. But I'm taking a risk here, and we're all vulnerable when it comes to getting involved with such personal things. I mean, in a lot of ways, I like to think that grad school or no grad school, everyone is self-taught. And the 2 years of grad school is just an extension of any individual's plan for themselves. I mean, artists kind of monetize things really strangely. The check you write at B&H is the easiest check you'll ever write. If a civilian burned a pile of money, that would be one thing, but somehow an artist burning a pile of money kind of makes sense. Like, I'm really mindful of how personal, like you said, like, what does it mean to go? Why apply? Like, what happens if you don't go? I don't know. All I know is that that these are really, really personal decisions.
And what is are there, I'm just nuts and bolts here for people, but
sure.
Are there classes? What are the classes?
Yeah.
Who are the professors? Like, what makes up the bulk of time spent under that umbrella? Not in your space where you're living, or in the dark room, or in your studio, but what makes up the bulk of that time?
I think the bulk of the time is leaving time, an ample amount of time, for the pursuit of individual work, right? not, so there are classes, and there is a kind of required classes. And
what are they?
They change, but let's see. Typically, every Tuesday night is critiques. Students in the program show 3 times a semester, twice during these regular Tuesday night critiques where 4 students show work in these like 55-minute increments. And then once in a marathon session where everybody, one after the other, shows their final, end of the semester work, which could be entirely new, could be an edit of things that have come together in different ways, could be any number of things. But it does have a certain sense of an attempt to revise and kind of get it together. At Tuesday Night Crits, there's about 5 critics. After we get through one rotation of everybody showing, then certain critics are swapped out for others. Nobody planned it this way, but I always think it's significant that at any time when a student shows work up at Yale, there's always somebody there, one critic who is new, who hasn't seen it before. Mm-hmm. So the fresh take is always being mixed with those of us that have history with a student, and those that it's a second time, a second crit, and then somebody who's new. And at the finals, there's a special guest critic who comes in for that. So yeah, I like that aspect of the panel critique, which is also supplemented by individual studio visits. In the first year, there's a technical intensive with Ben Donaldson, who is kind of the inheritor in many ways, spiritual inheritor of Richard Benson's kind of great ability to kind of mix poetic insight with hardcore technical rigor. Not an easy thing to do at all, and Ben is wonderful at it. It is absolutely a goal that everybody's fluency kind of increases, and that's also kind of, everybody kind of, it's a real workshop kind of setting where, people offer their own, these days it used to be like 5 things could go wrong in the darkroom, and now there's 200 ways to do the same thing with Photoshop. Mm-hmm. There's a Wednesday class called Critical Perspectives, which is mostly the VA series. For the last couple of years, each student has been entrusted and empowered and funded to choose a visiting artist on their own. So it just kind of worked out that way.
Wow,
I think it's terrific.
That's cool. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, it really is. Like, everybody has a chance to contribute to the curriculum. And so, there's a flat honorarium across the board for guests, and students reach out. And once they get somebody, that's going to be their VA. And they introduce them. The VA gives a talk and then does 4 studio visits. So, and I teach a class called Between Frames, which uses video assignments and lectures to kind of both kind of introduce moving image ideas to photographers. Some of them are already making videos, but I really use it as a teaching tool to kind of conceptualize what I think of just are some perennial, forces and collisions that come up so often in, I don't know what you want to call it, lens-based, or I don't know.
You're
just
talking about narrative concerns?
Production value, performance, pre-production, having a script, improvising. I just find that video, it just kind of cracks open things
point of view.
Absolutely, yeah. And so many times, like, our references, the references in photography aren't only photographers, but the way that we kind of relate to these kind of gambits and just, exquisite tensions. It's always, the thing I love about video is that the way it finds a place for awkwardness and grace, the ability to kind of let things fall apart and then they kind of come together, and it can be a very liberating kind of switch for. And, a certain amount of time in another medium can also be valuable to remind you what it is exactly that drew you to the first thing in the first place. Mm-hmm. Let's see. Also, in the course of the 2 years, students are required, they don't have a choice, they are required to explore the huge blue course catalog that comprises the entire university. So students have to take 2 classes over the course of their 2 years somewhere other than the School of Art.
Cool.
And if there's anything kind of that I still am astonished by about having an art school in that context is the classes that students get in, and they can apply to anything. They don't always get in, but they've taken, some students have taken business administration classes, psychology classes, art history, anthropology.
Yes, people can be interested in more than one thing.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's kind of wild because I think pedagogy and curriculums are always discussed and always being revised. But, there's just so much there, this kind of choose your own adventure.
Yeah.
And, the thing is that I don't want to make any generalizations, but let's just say that most of our students didn't go to Yale and probably didn't apply.
Right.
So,
yeah.
It's kind of got this Willy Wonka thing.
Yeah,
like,
no,
you
totally.
really do get this access to very rarefied stuff. I remember I was once, like an example of this is I was teaching an undergrad class and we were going around. I was asking the undergrads, what classes they were taking. And this woman said, and I'm taking a journalism class. And I said, oh, interesting. Who's teaching that? And he's like, Bob Woodward. I said, wow, that's great. That's really nice.
That's awesome.
Yeah. So, and you look, the pace is crazy. I mean, the one thing that is, the one thing that happens to the typical first year student is that there is something kind of odd, but anticipatable. I always anticipate it, which is that, there's 4 programs that comprise the Yale School of Art: graphic design, painting, sculpture, and photography. It's 4 separate admissions, 4 separate admissions processes. They at times I can feel like I have about as much in common with my friends who teach at UCLA than I do with my friends who teach in graphic design, in terms of how often do I see them and how often do we talk shop. Let's just say it's separate by design, but at the same time, they're all together. And there's a lot of things that happen across departments, socially and visiting crits and visiting studios. But those divisions are an interesting experience. And the first way they manifest is in this kind of compare and contrast, right? So our students, every year, there's somebody that says painting, they do a lot of studio visits, but they only really show in they call it a pit crit, once a semester. And sometimes that can be offered up as why do we have to show so much?
Right.
And one answer to that is that the painting's a much bigger program. And the other more nuanced answer to that is that the minds that came together to conceptualize the Yale photo program were based on, believe it or not, this is the first year ever that each grad student in photography has their own studio, because the program was designed in a conception of photography in which, what do you need a studio for? You need a dark room. So photographers had dark rooms,
right? Mm-hmm.
But they didn't have studios.
Yep.
So, and then the other thing was make a ton of work, because what else are you going to do?
Yeah.
And so, and then lastly, there's a lot of, I always say or at least I like to believe that law school is a little bit like being a lawyer, and med school, a little bit like being a doctor, but art school really can be nothing like what your life is like as an artist, and at the same time resemble all sorts of things that were going on in your life before you came and will be going on in your life after. So in terms of the pace, I think it's perfectly acceptable and a pretty good use of one's time to work like a crazy person, and then look back and say, I just can't believe I got that much done.
Right. That,
and also, I read a book about the history of MFA writing programs in this country after World War II, and one point it makes, which is it's obvious, I guess, but I found it relatable, which is that MFA writing programs led to the explosion of short story collections.
Right. Yep.
Because I think maybe there's a way to write a novel in an MFA writing program. I'm sure there is, but short stories get the job done. Short stories you can write and present in class, and it's also a form that I think everybody realizes that they have their own work ethics. There's going to be times where there's nothing going on except trying to get your life set up, but we really do try to optimize. It's not an artist residency, and sometimes I think a frustrated student kind of wishes it was. But it is it is, whether you're on financial aid or whether you're, somebody's footing the bill, all of it is designed to maximize the amount of time that you can just work on your work and meet deadlines, which are a gift, because what gets done without them? I don't know. And also, I think the way I like to describe it, the way I would want anybody to think about it is that I like to think of students as being connoisseurs of everything, and connoisseurs of critics, because we give them a lot of different voices to kind of field. And sometimes it can seem like you can look at the formality of a typical Yale photo crit as overly formal, or maybe even looking like a communist show trial. But the fact is that it's also an abstraction which I think kind of honors the fact that we're not a bunch of friends sitting around talking about your work. This is school, and in a way, the formality, in a weird way, I think mirrors an internal thing. The way I look at it is that we are always our own worst critic. There is the most withering criticism in that room will never be as hard to deal with or stomach as your own self-criticism. And in that respect, I like to think that for 2 years, you kind of give yourself a break. You kind of just outsource this internal process, which is always going on, about doubt, revision, really big questions about what the hell am I doing? And let it's kind of outsource it. Let us kind of rummage around in there, and it can be. I like to think it's helpful, but then again, like I am no authority on all. I can't list all the different takeaways from a graduate experience, but I am regularly impressed by what happens, especially when it doesn't look like anything is about to happen. I mean, you get surprised. I don't know anybody that doesn't agree with this. Like, one of the sweetest moments for a critic is to just have, really just question some plan or, some sweeping ambition for work that isn't quite even there yet. But like, there was a student once who, described this sprawling project that they were going to do, crisscrossing the country and kind of looking at this kind of war-touched landscape. It was in the early days of the Iraq invasion, and vets were starting to come back. And it was so ambitious, and nothing about the photographs she was showing gave anybody. So that's the thing. Like, we are not building consensus. The critics do not have to agree. We're not looking for unanimous decisions at all. But in this particular case, nobody thought that this idea had any hope of coming off. And so there was just a lot of questions, not a lot of encouragement. Came back in the fall and she did it. She really did it. And so critics love being wrong. Really, truly. Like, those kind of surprises are great.
So who's in that when you say critics? Who's the last sort of question I want to ask about experience there, but I am curious who those people are. So who?
I think of it as there's a near orbit and a distant orbit, right? So Gregory Crutzen is there. He's the director of the program. He gets sabbaticals every now and then, but so he's near orbit, and I am there both semesters. This year, for the last 2 years, Sandra Perry has been solidly in the mix and there for every crit for the whole semester. Then there's a category of critic which I think they share a similar description, in the sense that these are folks that are working artists who don't teach elsewhere. You won't see,
right.
You won't see Paul Graham's name on, some, I don't know. I'd have to think about who fits up. Taryn Simon, Paul Graham, Lorna Simpson, whoever. There's a certain category of the working artist who probably doesn't have time for this kind of thing, but somehow has been asked and has accepted. And I like to think that, like Sharon the Shot, people that come and they come with whatever expectations they have. This is always very gratifying to me to see a serious artist come with any number of expectations. Richard Prince came. Of course, they've got some thoughts about what they're walking into. But then to see, in each case, to see them look around and say, oh, huh. And I like to think that what happens in many cases is what they say is, wow, this is kind of valuable to me. Like this is kind of nourishing. Like, you don't get health insurance for showing up for 5 Tuesday nights. You probably should, but they don't. There's a lot of things that visiting critics don't get. But I am regularly find myself kind of witnessing newcomers look around and they don't say it exactly, but it seems to me what they find is conversations and kind of free-ranging speculative stuff and a kind of engagement on the part of the students, which is it's hard to find, Well,
I can't imagine that, if you've been in the art world for a while, you've probably, either absorbed or worked hard not to absorb a certain amount of sort of cynicism or jadedness. And I'm sure sort of showing up and being around all these people who are feeling quite hopeful and filled with energy. I'm sure that's a wonderful experience. How can that not be a wonderful experience?
I mean, also plenty of existential dread and all that stuff, but that's familiar too.
Yeah, of course. But I think that existential dread is different when it's not married to actual experience. It's imagined, right? That's a different category.
Yeah. I mean, it means a lot to me that I can I want to be able to, like you said, nuts and bolts, right? There are kind of much simpler terms that I personally need to be able to describe what goes on there, what I participate in ways that are just clear and quantifiable and frankly unpretentious. The fact is that in many ways, I think I would go out on a limb and say I think this is unique, particularly unique to photography, which is that one way or the other, historically, well before grad programs, a photographer went where the pictures were being made. They went and worked as photographers. They got jobs. And inevitably, whatever the context, whether it was a catalog shoot or working for the New York Times or Magnum or whatever, ultimately something went on, I think, pretty similar, right? You do your best, you show it to somebody, and you get a sense of these varying criteria and judgments. And even the context itself functions as a kind of education in terms of helping refine your sense of what this enterprise is for and what it's not for. So someone like Avedon flourishes within that context and in fact sees untapped potential and blows it up from within. And Robert Frank was, Todd Papageorge used to love to quote, and in a very serious way, quote a moment in which Winogrand came to him and said, if I have to put a strobe on my camera and a long lens and go shoot some banality one more time, I'm going to kill myself. And Todd would always add for emphasis, and he meant it. So, I just feel like, in one case you get paid to do something and the other you pay for it. But at the same time, this kind of contrasting the thing you care about and the things you want against these other versions are, it's just all this kind of process of self-definition of a sense of purpose. And even within just artists, where art is the most important thing, then there's all these really important questions about how I'm going to do it. Will commercial work rot my soul, or will it be a kind of, way to create kind of synergy between my personal ideas and kind of the harder core world of commerce, things like that.
Or is it just a way of making a living?
Well, this is the existential part, I want to give it some acknowledgement in terms of just, photography wears a lot of hats. It'll make an existentialist out of anybody, and that line between art and just nothing. I mean, I just can't think of another medium in which the high wire act is so perilous, right? I mean, Heidegger said poetry was the most refined of art forms because it was made of the most degraded substance. And I think that's something that, well, if you can make your peace with that as a photographer, then you're in good shape, There is something about the kind of conversations that I'm a part of, which, of course, have to do with what a student wants and what they've done, and how those things sync up and how there might be dissonance and whatnot. But at the same time, I think if you got to try all the cliches to get past them, why not do it in school? That's the other thing I think grad schools can be really good for is, working through an influence. Not just killing your darlings, but like really kind of learning to take what's useful and just not really be too precious about the things the things that have influenced you.
I know from, firsthand experience of working with a lot of Yale MFAs, grads, that, people often, what they go in with and what they come out with are two very different things.
Yeah. There's a lot of trajectories, and I really pay attention to them. There's one in which somebody comes in with very kind of quiet, we could say like literary, there's motifs and quiet moments and things return. And clearly this has been the result of a long, slow, unfolding commitment to a subject or place or whatever. And often the 2 years can be in many ways about kind of turning up the volume on that, almost coming up with the loudest and most kind of voluptuous version of the thing you care about, or simply about doing something you've never done before. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's a Greg assignment. Do something you've never done before. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, that's a good one. And why not? Because I think the one thing and this is, I guess, advice, but it's also me like kind of bearing witness to this so regularly. It's like when you start, I do think, it's hard to get in. Getting in should feel good. Mm-hmm. The one immediate benefit of getting into Yale when I was 21 was my grandma Sylvia could go around to all her friends and say, my grandson at Yale. And she left out the photo part, but there should be some pleasure, like validation, or like, I don't know, these things just come in thimblefuls. So first, like, it should feel good because it's hard. Yep. But then the other thing is sometimes, there can be a condition where and it's understandable, like, well, wait a minute now, this is the work that got me into Yale. Well, why would I want to change anything? Mm-hmm. This is the work that got me, like, I don't want to screw that up. Or worse, I don't want to disappoint the people that thought. And the thing is that, there's so many different ways of saying this, but it truly is a workshop, a laboratory, a test site, and in many ways it's contingent. And I think really most effective when it is considered private. The internet, I don't know what to say about it, but the one thing that I found is it's fascinating. It's like applicants show up at their interviews. They know everybody. They know what they're doing. It's like they're visiting the set of a reality TV show. Mm-hmm. Like, Cole, I love your work. I was that thing you did. And this is just the world we live in. It's fine. But sometimes I do think to myself, like, if there is a virtue here, it is that you're not, you have an audience and you have a stage, but the whole point is that we're not there. We're not writing reviews, we're not kicking you off the island,
Right. Yep.
It really is, it has to be self-directed. You have to say, like, what is this? What's unique about this context? Mm-hmm. Well, what's unique about it is that you can do something really embarrassing, but revealing. The gallery that you show with is not going to say, whoa, I don't know about this new direction. They'll say that sometimes, or let's just say that as much as it might sound like judgment, it really is not. It's about the belief in the fact that, well, as Gregory likes to say, we all kind of have one story, and the goal is to keep on finding ways to tell it. That's pretty close to what I think goes on. I don't know. I hope this is helpful.
No, I was going to say I love that, and I love the idea of just sort of ending there on a quote of Greg's. Yeah. Because I think it's a lovely sentiment. So,
and there's a lot. I just want to say there's also a lot. Like I was starting to say, there's a lot of different types of trajectories, right? Sometimes people end on a very pulled together, clarified, finished place. Other times people end in a very confused place. Mm-hmm. But, it's 2 years, which expands your sense of history, of the medium, and you learn so much from the other people in that class, watching what growth and risk and stuff like that, and spinning your wheels. You see what all of that looks like. But, I really do savor these trajectories in which somebody comes, struggles, and then you don't really hear from them for a couple of years, and then you do.
Yeah.
And you see that the trajectory, the end of those 2 years is the end of nothing. And they struggled, but they were left with something. And they also knew that the best work was ahead of them.
Yeah.
So sometimes I worry a little bit about inevitably you will know a program by its graduates, but I recommend anybody interested in any grad school look at the ones that are 10 years out. That'll tell you, and sometimes you got to dig because not everybody is necessarily showing at that moment, but 12 years, 15 years out, maybe they will. I love the slow burn. I really do.
I'm a big proponent of handling things like a turtle. Okay, we have to wrap up because we're zooming over. There's so many things I didn't get to, but I really loved the conversation. So thank you so much, John. And
thanks, Sasha.
I really appreciated hearing all this.
Pleasure.
And so be well, and until next time, talk to you soon.
Looking forward to it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
PhotoWork with Sasha Wolf is produced by me, Michael Chauvin-Dalton of Real Photo Show. The executive producer is Sasha Wolf, and our theme music is by J. Walter Hawks. You can hear PhotoWork on all your favorite podcast platforms. Please rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or Spotify, and be sure to subscribe on any one of those services or wherever you listen to podcasts.